All right, we're going to talk a little bit about how, what questions to ask when you are in the evaluation process. Sorry, and I apologize. I'm losing my voice. I'm trying to do minimal videos today, but hopefully you can still hear me and understand me. So, the online course did just show kind of why evaluation is important. If you read some of the script and the narrative that's on the tab. But what's really important to note is that evaluation is a continuous endeavor throughout the problem solving process. It's never one and done. You're continuing evaluating the interventions that you're setting, but you're also evaluating how you're asking questions, how you're engaging with the client. You're always looking at how to better improve your service delivery. So after you've done evaluation, it may indicate that you need to reprioritize the problem, that maybe the identified problem that you created goals around isn't actually what is the root of the problem. And that can be some because the clients didn't initially want to acknowledge what was going on, or maybe situations in life has changed. Maybe you do have the specific problem correct, but now you need to reassess the goals and objectives. Maybe you need to reassess the evaluations, or maybe you have to assess what goes on after you've implemented the intervention. So how and what questions do you ask to be able to figure out the effectiveness of the services you've done so far? So the great evaluation question, it's kind of a duh question, is has the goal been accomplished that the client did identify? And it's going to be a yes or no answer. So that's probably one time in our data collection or questioning where we want to ask a closed-end question because now it's going to direct us a certain way. So if the goal has been accomplished, that's awesome. It means that something changed, whether because you had the most awesome intervention or maybe something changed anyways. So one of the things that you do want to flesh out, has the goal been accomplished because of this, because something happened outside of the treatment plan. So let's say your client was trying to maintain housing and they're at risk of getting evicted. And so your goal was to remain housing and not get evicted. And then COVID hit and there was a lot of the rules that went into place that said, no, you can't get evicted, or they got the stimulus check. So those things weren't necessarily created during the contracted plan, but it did help you meet the goals. So you want to be careful that you don't make the assumption that your intervention was the miracle cure for whatever issue was going on. So you do want to just do good due diligence and make sure there wasn't outside circumstances that contributed to goal completion. They're not bad things. I mean, it's part of the client's life, but you then don't want to make the assumption that your intervention worked and would work for everybody. It's not the strongest assessment piece when outside influences solve the problem for you. And then you just want to know, what is the evidence to show that the goal was achieved? So if it was a client saying that they wanted to improve their feelings of anxiety and depression, or maybe you repeatedly gave them assessment tools one's called the GAD-7. It's a generalized anxiety disorder. 7, you ask 7 questions to rank anxiety. Or the PHQ-9, which is the patient health questionnaire, 9 questions around patient health and mood. So maybe you administered those surveys on a biweekly basis and you saw continual improvement in scores. So there's evidence to show that their depression and anxiety symptoms had lessened. So that's a perfect ideal world where all of your goals and objectives would be successful. We know that's not going to happen all the time. So if you've answered no, the goal has not been accomplished, here are some really good exploration questions that you're going to want to ask yourself and the client. You might want to implement a scaling question to see if they've made any sort of progress, because that will help instill some motivation. So maybe they didn't completely lessen their feelings of depression and anxiety, but they made some progress. So a scaling question can be implemented there to acknowledge the effort and also identify how much further they have to go. is something happened because of circumstances outside of that contracted plan. So maybe using the COVID example as well, an individual was their goal was to engage in more social activities. And then COVID hit and all of the social activities stopped because we were isolating and social distancing. Well, that was something outside of an individual's control that impacted the accomplishment of the goal. Did you make the completion date too soon? So we needed to maybe extend and give a client more time. Did the person or system who was responsible or contracted to do some sort of activity, did they fail to accomplish it? Did they not engage in it, whether because they didn't have motivation or because something else occurred? Did we select inappropriate tasks? Or was it in the wrong sequence? Or did we describe it wrong? If the goal had been accomplished, but the problem still continues, did we identify the problem incorrectly? Or did we identify the goal incorrectly? So maybe it's, they identified that they're fighting with their significant other all the time, and it had nothing to do with their significant other. And so maybe the goal around it was, I want to improve my relationship with my significant other, not fight all the time, but really they were really stressed out about something else, and they were taking it out on their significant other. So the problem and the root of it was really like maybe unresolved trauma versus relationships. So maybe having to realign and reprioritize the problem. And was there anything in the social worker client system relationship that inhibited goal accomplishment? Was the social worker working too hard and enabling the client? Was the social worker not following through on homework check-ins? Did the social worker not provide the client with the resources that would have helped them reach the goal? Or was there some mistrust between the client and the social worker? Was it not a good working relationship? Was there just miscommunication? We want to explore those things as well. So just because a goal doesn't work, it doesn't always indicate one specific thing went wrong. You really want to look at all of this data collection around evaluation. So once you've clarified what prevented goal accomplishment, the social worker and the client then can begin to ask, well, why did this happen? So an appropriate use of the why question, you're using it in a non-judgmental tone. So you don't want your client to feel like they are being attacked because they didn't accomplish the goal. You want to phrase it in a way that invites the conversation in of exploring some of those things on this different side. Was it because the client wasn't doing it? Was it something else? So you want to identify one of the reasons why the goal didn't become accomplished, and what can we do to remedy the situation and make goal accomplishment feasible. So maybe it was just too unrealistic of a goal, and that's okay. That's why we use the SMART goals, because we want it to be realistic. And maybe our assumption at the time was that it was realistic, but maybe just the client was not in the preparation or action stage of their treatment, and they've moved now to the pre-contemplation, so they just have to reevaluate. So maybe if you're thinking around the scope of substance use, maybe your client at the time was really, really ready to be sober, but as that became closer to being a reality, it became overwhelming, or maybe a stressor occurred that you have to figure out how to make this more feasible. So when the evaluation has taken place that leads to a reformulation of the plan, the social worker records the dates of the evaluation and the plan revisions on the contracted plan. So you just want to go back to your treatment plan and give updates on how you've changed and modified. So there's two different types of evaluations. You have a summative evaluation and you have a formative evaluation. So some of you, I think, may have taken research, very few of you, but if you haven't, you'll be taking research with me next semester. I apologize. It is not COVID. I did test. It's just a nasty cold. So we'll talk more about kind of this evaluation process and some of these research type terms in our actual research class. But summative evaluation is kind of thinking about like the root word of sum. It's like adding it up. So it's very quantitative, like looking at the qualities, getting a very specific concrete identifier. So looking for the specific reasons that contributed to the success or the failure of the intervention. Like I said, it's more quantitative in nature. So maybe the client just did not go to enough, didn't collect enough X, Y, or Z to be able to accomplish their goal, or they didn't spend enough time at the the library that they identified. So it's just looking at very specific, more objective information, where formative is kind of looking at the process of the work and how the work during the various steps in the service influence the final outcome. So that's more of like a narrative, kind of subjective, qualitative in nature. So it might be eliciting feedback from the client. It might be just conversations you've had with them about what doesn't work. It might be there. So like sometimes when you're assessing symptoms, so like depression and anxiety, some of that is very qualitative because you're basing the symptom severity off of what the client is sharing, so in their perception. So maybe they're having a really bad day and they are feeling more anxious on the day that you're evaluating, and so then you kind of have to backtrack and figure out like, oh, kind of flesh that out, but you're going to get that more from the formative evaluation time. So that is going to conclude a little bit of kind of diving deeper into evaluation, what questions to ask and what kind of data you're looking for, because that's going to help you become very effective in evaluating and then redesigning goals and treatment plans.